The next part of week 2 is slips. Slips are easy. We're going to talk about them more in depth in the second part of the course, where I discuss the chemical composition of the slip. For the purposes of the first part, we're only going to be covering the slips as the combination of the clay body and the water. There are several ways of mixing and making your slip. You probably made your slip before. You can watch one of the ways that I make the slip in the demo posted in the week. There are many different ways. Normally, it's the combination of the crushed dry clay with the wet water. You could use the leftovers from throwing or from somewhere else mixed with water. You could also use the recipes from lazy.org that we are going to talk about later in part 2, where we will discuss how we can modify the slip, what we can adjust to make it melt a little bit more or melt less, how can we adhere to the surface better or worse through chemistry. You could use the mixer, the immersive mixer, to mix the clay. If you want texture, you might actually not want that. You want the opposite. You want like little chunks to stay there so that they create more texture. One of the cool ways to use slip and to make slip is to collect local clays and mix them with water. We're going to talk more about wild clays, how to collect them, how to identify them, how to process them in the next week. For now, I can just say you can just grab clay from outdoors, mix it with water, and try to apply it to your ceramics and see what happens. Test first, though. Application of slips is important. How you apply and in which layers you apply, what do you put on top of what, all of this can create completely different results. Rough brushes versus soft brushes. I like to use rougher brushes that create this antique look when you use the brush and it goes on top of your object and it kind of doesn't cover everything, so it leaves a little bit of a surface of the clay body. So that's one of the tools you can use to put your slip on top of your object. It could be handmade brushes, natural brushes. So I collected some of the materials on the left that I'm going to make my own brushes with and I'm going to decorate my vases with. So I'm just going to use it as a brush. And as you can see, the example on the right, those are the brushes created by Lydia, Ceramic and Nature on Instagram. She's a wonderful artist and I really truly admire her because of her connection with nature. Everything she makes is so full of nature. You can even see it in these brushes. They're just amazingly beautiful. And so you could use brushes like that and handmade brushes to apply to your ceramics, and various kinds of materials will create different textures and different surface. In the demo for this week, you're gonna see how I apply slip using these 4 materials. It's just regular plastic, some gauze or like cotton paper, linen, as well as some toilet paper. All of these could be used to apply slip and they create a little bit different patterns. However, they're kind of similar. It just depends on how you apply, whether you like put the slip on with a brush and then you apply it to the surface, or if you like crumble it and attach it. Some people even attach the whole thing with the slip to the object and then burn it away in the kiln. We're going to talk about combustibles later, but this is one of the examples of the thing that you can burn in the kiln covered with slip. Of course, you can also use your fingers. I think just grabbing a bunch of slip and putting it on the vase or sculpture gives the best feeling and the best connection with the material. Once you apply the slip, you can expand the object from within to create the cracks. Different people do it in different ways. Sodium silicate is one of the ways that people create this kind of cracks. Akira Satake uses the kuhiki technique, where he does it from the inside and the top layer of the slate has dried a little bit already and we're expanding the object that's probably about leather hard, maybe a little bit less, from within. So exactly the rule that you can break, you can modify the object. It's just gonna crack a little bit. This is my example of the vase, and as you can see, it is just slit. Everyone's like, oh, what's that? That's slit. It's just different layers of slit. You can layer your slips a lot, and I think the layers of different slips made from different clay bodies create amazing texture. You can see here big chunks. I did not mix my slip. I just took it from the wheel and applied directly to the base. I waited until it dries and I applied another layer of white slip using hard brush. Waited again, I applied another layer and then another layer until I was satisfied. Another couple of examples of me using the kahiki technique. So you can see there's a lot of slip, again applied in various layers and broken from within to create the cracks. Obviously, some of the objects are not wood safe and not watertight. Yes, there is an actual hole right there, but that's an artistic choice. You can see it's all kind of decomposing. So a decaying vase. And the idea behind this vase was decay. Ekaterina Drain, she's a Russian artist and her Instagram is Tetchy Flat. I think she's the best at slips and at different kinds of decorations. She's working with a lot of layers and she's experimenting a lot. So if you like antique look of the vases and if you like this beautiful, clean aesthetics, I highly recommend looking at her account. She's one of my favorite artists who work with slips and various materials. Beautiful work and beautiful combination of various layers of slips. Crackled slip is another topic that I'd like to talk about, and we are going to cover a lot of it in the next part of the course whenever we're going to talk about glazes, because the crackled slip that I use is just a specific recipe. This recipe fits certain clay bodies better and other clay bodies worse. So whenever you're using a slip, I recommend trying it out on different clay bodies and seeing how is it going to attach to the clay body. Sometimes it attaches well, sometimes it doesn't. If you don't want it to attach well, the easiest way to not attach well is to put your slip on top of the bisque-fired object. Yes, people normally say you're not supposed to do that, but if you want it to fall off, you do it. So you're not supposed to do it because it's going to fall off. If you want it to fall off, you can apply it to a disc. Alternatively, this piece, for example, here, there's slip on top of the glazed surface. For some reason, when you refire a piece that's been glazed before and you apply slip on top, the slip actually holds up pretty well because glaze kind of continues to heat up and melt. And so the slip attaches to the surface a little bit better. And I think the moral of this slide is try various slips, try various recipes, various clay bodies on top of various surfaces. Maybe on top of different clay bodies, maybe on top of differently fired clay bodies. It could be greenware, bisqueware, or glazeware. And as I said before, wild clay slip is cool. Depending on what kind of clay you're using, the slip might melt a lot and might be shiny if it's a low-fired wild clay, or if it's a high-fired clay, then it's going to be rough and crumbly. You will never know how it's going to look like, so the best way is to test, as I mentioned in the very beginning of this course. This concludes the lecture for the slips for part 1 of the course. However, there's going to be more cool stuff going on in the second part of the course, week 7, when we're going to talk about the chemistry behind the crackle slip and just the chemistry behind slips and engobs in general. See you in the next video.